I want to quickly walk us through how we can set up a nice render scene, really simple for our models. That'll give us a decent render. Not going to be the best, most advanced way, but it'll be a pretty quick setup with the least amount of frustration for you guys. All right, so here I have my model here, and I actually have a color attached to it. So if I press 4 on the keyboard, I go to wireframe. 5, I go gray shaded. 6 on the keyboard shows my texture, and 7 shows the light sources in my scene, which are none right now. So my model shows up black. So I'm going to press 6 on my keyboard and go back to diffuse. First thing I'm going to do now that I know I'm going to be rendering is I'm going to save my scene as a separate rendering scene. So I'm going to call this, I don't know, Granock screenshot or render, whatever you want to say. Something that just you're not worrying about, messing up your original model file because we're going to be adding lights and different settings to this scene. So just adding a separate save just for the render would probably be pretty smart at this point. The next thing I'm going to do is inside of my scene view here, I'm going to go to the view menu. We're not up at the very top. We're not in the toolbox area. We're at our scene view menu. So I'll press view, camera settings, and I'm going to click resolution gate right here. All right. What that does is it brings up a basically like a little lens or a window that I'm looking through. And this resolution right here, 960 by 540, I'll zoom in on that. This little resolution right here is basically what we're going to be capturing our renders in instead of our render menu. So I want to change that though. That doesn't seem like a good HD setting. So to change that, I'm going to go up to my toolbox, and if they're hidden, you can expand different parts of the toolbox up here with these little brackets. So expand it until you see the action little clappers here, like start seeing little clappers. Look for the one that has the gearbox. I think it might be a little bit different for 2014. This is 2016. You're going to look for display render settings, this little window right here. And what you're going to want to do is we're going to do two things here. In common, we're going to scroll down until we see image size. That's great. We're going to set our image size to HD 1080. This is our 1920 by 1080. It's 1080p. It's what the standard resolution for high def is currently right now. Then we're going to click on our Maya software tab. We're going to use Maya software in this demonstration. And we're going to change that quality from custom to production quality. And that's all we got to do inside of our render settings window right there. So I can X that out. So here's my character right here. And why don't I just take a test render? So I'll get an angle and I'll press the plane action slapper button right here, render the current frame. And then I bring up my render view, and that doesn't look too good, does it? Everything's evenly lit. It's almost even washed out. So we're going to have to set up some simple lights in here that'll basically help us make sure that our models get as much flare as they currently as they can right now at our proficiency level in Maya. So the first thing I'm going to do is make a key light. So I'm going to go to Create, Lights, and I'm going to use a spotlight for this key light. So I'm going to select spotlight. And as always, I'm going to bring up my outliner. I'm going to Windows Outliner. That way I can just keep tabs on everything going on in my scene here. So I'm going to position it right in my scene view right there, so you guys can see what's going on. So I'm going to name this guy Granock because that's the character's name. Mesh 001. And I'm going to take my spotlight. I'm going to call this key light. Spot. All right. And just to make sure I'm getting the right kind of light going on in this level or on this scene, I want to do two things. I'm going to press 7 on my keyboard. And so I can aim my spotlight even easier, I'm going to go to, what is it, View, Camera Settings. Actually, what is it? Is it Panels? Yes, it's in Panels, Look Through Selected. All right. Instead of going to View, Camera Settings for that resolution gate, we're going to Panels, and then we're going to go through look through selected. Basically, that puts you in the spotlight. So now when you aim it, look, since we're in 7 mode, we see exactly where the light is falling on and off my character. And since we're looking through my spotlight now, we actually have my spotlight selected. So if I bring up my 4-panel view by pressing spacebar, look at my, I'm going to center on the spotlight and all 4 views here. Look at my spotlight move as I position it in my perspective window. I got to reset, look through selected. So I'll go to panels, look through selected again. There we go. So you see how my spotlight's getting updated in all 4 views? It's because I'm currently like driving inside of it in my perspective window. So I'm going to hover my cursor over my perspective window and press spacebar. That'll maximize its sight. What I want to do now is I want to set up a pretty good looking little spotlight. So I'm going to add a fade on my spotlight by adjusting the penumbra, penumbra angle. Cone angle adjusts how wide our angle is on our spotlight. So I'm going to do that. And drop off basically says, okay, my light gets weaker as it travels, but how much does it drop off? So I'm going to do something like that. I'm going to turn on, looks like ray trace shadows are on. I'm going to turn ray trace shadows off. I'm going to use depth map shadows. I'm going to set the resolution up to 1024 and increase the filter size by about 3 or so. That kind of creates a softer kind of shadow effect. All right. So I'm going to position my spotlight kind of up into the right of my, up into the left of my character, kind of looking down on him, almost like he was getting a spotlight on a stage, right? All right. And then I'm going to increase the intensity so he's fairly well lit, like so. Right now, you're just kind of eyeing it. All right. Look through selected. There we go. So I'm kind of looking at my camera angle in all 4 views. I got a nice 45-degree angle for my character, and he's kind of above him, and everything's looking good. So I'm going to go, oh, let me reset it. There we go. So how do I get out of this mode? I don't want to be looking through my spotlight anymore. I'm going to leave my spotlight where it is. Well, we'll go to panels, and if we go to perspective, we'll see something interesting. We have camera shape 1, which is basically saying the camera inside of my spotlight, and we have just regular old perspective. If we select regular old perspective, then we get back to our regular perspective camera with our nice resolution gate on there. All right, so I got my key light made. Why don't I create an off light next? So I'll go to create lights, and then we're going to make a point light for this one. And we're going to kind of set it opposite of my key light. So it's going to be low, and it's going to be to the right of my model here. And we're going to go to shadows. We're going to turn off ray trace shadows. We're going to use depth map shadows. Increase the resolution. Increase this filter size to about 7. That'll give it an even softer fall off. And play around. You want it a little bit dimmer on this side, but you still want to be able to see all the information here. Basically, we're trying to create uneven lighting on our model, so it's just not all washed out as you saw in the first render. And bring up my outliner, and we'll call this off light point. So I know it's a point light. And I'm actually going to copy off light point, and this is going to be my backlight. So I'll go ahead and move it to the back of my character. And this is going to give us a nice rim lighting on the silhouette of our model. So we'll call this backlight point. And this one's pretty easy to set up. I'm going to just kind of position it. And I'm going to turn up the intensity by like a lot. So I'll take the intensity and crank it up to maybe like 5 or so. This will give us some nice rim lighting on the outside of my model here. Notice how we're getting like some really light highlights, like on the top of the hat and on the backs of the arms. All right, great. So now I'm going to pick a pretty interesting angle. Now that I got all my lights set up, and I'm going to hit the render button. All right, we see a few things here. He's a little too saturated with light. So I think we're going to have to dial down the intensities. And here's an important part of the iteration process in rendering. I'm going to select an area on my model, like so, maybe like the face and the shoulder pad. And I'm going to select this and drag, left click and drag this box around it. And here we see a red square. So any changes I make to my lighting, if we press the render button with the blue or the box around it, it's only going to update that area. So you see how it goes black and then boom. That'll help save on rendering time for you guys as you're making changes to your setup here. It's a really good trick that you guys need to learn to use. All right, so I'm going to kind of push this out of the way so I can kind of work on dual monitors is a little bit easier. So basically all I have to do is dial down the intensity and all of my lights. So I'm going to bring up my outliner, select my key light. Yeah, that was way too much on my key light. So I'll dial that down to 1. I'll select my off light and dial its intensity down to like 0.7 and take my backlight and maybe do 2.5 intensity. So now with my square selected, I'll just drag another box here. If I press the render button with a little, you know what I did? I changed the camera angle. So let me go back. So that's the weird problem with this. If I'm rendering on the camera that I'm actually working with in my scene, that could be a problem. How? Because I want my camera angle to stay the same, so when I make these changes, we're looking at the same little model here. All right, so it's almost like I need a second camera in my scene, one that I can work with and one that'll always stay in position for my shots. Well, that's easy to do. We'll go to create, we'll go to cameras, we'll make a new camera. We'll call this render camera. All right. So what the heck? I mean, how am I going to use this? Well, we want to take the resolution gate off of our regular perspective camera. And what do I mean by my regular perspective camera? I'm talking about if I open up my outliner, this camera that says persp, that's the default perspective camera. Typically, when you're making good renders of your models, you do not want to use that one. So I'll go to view, I'll go to camera settings, and I'll go to no gate. So now I'll know that this is just my working camera. Well, how the heck am I going to position my other camera in the scene? Well, if I go up the panels, go to perspective, and change my perspective to render camera, I'm now in my render camera. All right. And just to reiterate, I'll go to perspective and I'll show that camera in the scene. Well, that's where that trust me, that's where it's at. All right. So I'm in my perspective camera or my render camera right now. What I want to do is I'm going to throw up the render resolution gate on this camera. And just to make sure, I'm going to go to panels, perspective, and I'm going to select render camera. I'm going to go to view, camera settings, resolution gate. Perfect. So now, while I'm inside of my render camera, I'm going to select my model, press F to focus on it. So now I'm pivoting around my model. Now I can set an interesting camera angle, and then I can switch back to my regular perspective. And now my render camera is always going to be there. But whenever I press my render button, well, I'm getting my render. What's going on here? Aha. To get the render view window to render from your render camera that we just set up, we'll press render, render, render camera. And boom, we already have my camera set in place. It's rendering off my render camera. Let me move this. I think that's, yeah. As you can see, it says, which camera is this? This is render camera. So I'm going to minimize this real quick. And I think he's still a little bit too light. And in fact, do I want this little darkness under his, I mean, that looks cool, right? But that's a question you have to ask with these shadows going on. Maybe I want to increase my off light so he gets a little bit more light underneath his underneath his face. So I'm going to position my off light to be kind of underneath the character, give him a nice uplight so we can see underneath that face. All right. So instead of rendering the whole thing, I really want to see what's going on underneath this mask. So I'll click and drag my little red box with a left click and drag around his face, and hit my render button with the box around it. And as you can see, let me maximize this. This little red area right here, we can now see under his hat, and it's a little bit lighter around here. So just how much lighter? And since we're rendering in my current camera is render camera, we can move my perspective camera and my working camera any which way to make all the necessary edits in my scene. So I can just keep updating the same angle with my red box, and I can basically render different parts of my model, so I'm not rendering the whole thing. That saves a lot of time. Or you can just do the whole thing. Start fresh right here. All right, great. I still think he might be a little too bright, so I'm going to move this box. So I'm going to bring up my outliner again, select my key light, and I need to get to my attributes there. There's my attribute editor. And I'm going to dial this down to point 0.8, take my off light and set it to maybe 0.5. And I'm going to leave my backlight as is. Bring up my render camera again, my render view, and I'm just going to do a full render. All right, I'm happy with that. All right, I got a nice little up view underneath his mask. We can still see there's like a shadow over his eyes from the bill of his hat. I got some nice rim lighting on his fingertips and on the top of the hat right there. You can see right there a little nice highlight. And on the tips of my shoulder piece right here, a nice little rim light there. And I would say that's a pretty good model to go with. All right. So now the next step is, okay, do we want to present it on a background like this? I don't really want to. So the quickest fix to do would be to select my render camera. All right. And then go to my attribute editor over here on the right. And we're going to scroll down until we find environment. All right. We want render camera shape, I guess. And in my environment, we can change the background color of my image. And I want to do kind of a darkish gray. So now when I render my character, all right. Oh, it switched back to the different perspective camera. Notice I don't have my gray background and I'm at the wrong angle. So I guess I'll just have to go back to render in my render view, then render, and then render camera. And it'll automatically render. And there I have a nice kind of a darkish gray background, like so. And I can even see the alpha channel on my character. All right, so I have this nice little silhouette of my character there. And I like what I see. I got a nice gray background. So I'm going to go to File, and I'm going to Save Image. I'm going to select my option box there. All right, Save Raw Image, Apply. Let's see. Save Image. And I have this dialog box. Probably the fastest thing to do would be to save it as a JPEG. But I'm going to show you guys a trick inside of Photoshop. I'm going to actually save this as a Targa. Targas are nice because it's lossless information, meaning there's no compression. So the file sizes are a little bit bigger, but it allows you to take it into Photoshop with an alpha channel so you can isolate your model and you don't lose any information. So I'm going to go to I'm going to call this render 001 and we'll save it. All right. And I'm going to open up Photoshop real quickly. And I'm going to go to open and I'm going to navigate to my render demo folder. And there's my render 001 target, and I'll open this up. All right, and there's my image right there. Oh, it's a little bit darker in Photoshop. Maybe it was just getting washed out in the Maya render view. Either way, taking it into Photoshop is always a good indication of what you'll be working with. But you'll notice I have my layers channels right here, all my layers in my Photoshop. And then next to it, I have something called channels. And if I make everything visible or hide everything except my alpha, I get a nice alpha channel right here. And here's a cool little trick. So even with all this stuff selected, I can go to my alpha channel, and if I hold, let me deselect. If I hold down Control and left click the little picture icon in my alpha channel right here, I get a outline of just my character. So now I'll double click on the layer to flatten it out. Now I can do select, and then where's inverse? Do an inverse selection, and I can isolate my model and put any kind of background I want behind him now. So I'll select this mid gray again, hit Alt and backspace. And now I have a model that's completely isolated from my background, and I can really focus on the presentation of my model now. So that alpha channel trick, really handy. Remember, I went to my channels, I held down left control and left clicked, and that gave me a, well, it looks like my alpha channel is a little bit off now, but you guys remember how I did that a second ago. Yeah, my alpha is not following along. But you can see my alpha kind of making everything kind of red and not red. All right. So now that I got my character isolated, I'm going to turn off my alpha. Now I can pretty much save him any way I want. There we go. So I can hit go to File in Photoshop, Save As. And I like to save pretty much everything as PNGs. Hardly any compression there. A little bit bigger file size, but not too bad. And I can call this render 001.png. I can save it. Now I have a nice HD render of my model with it's got nice lighting, got shadows, and ultimate control over my image there. A lot of work for just one little screenshot, huh? But most of that time was spent just explaining things to you guys. Once you get into a role with this, it'll be really easy. And you can even set up template scenes inside of Maya that already have the lights and the camera set up just the way you want it. And you can use layers here. I can select all my lights in my outliner, and I'll create a new layer. And I can call this lights lay. And then I can select my camera and make a new layer from selected. Call this camera lay. And then I can lock both of these. So now I can't touch my lights at all, but I can bring in different models. So if I had, I don't know, let's say another model, I'll delete that one. I can go to import, and I can import Granock.ma. This is the original model. It'll bring in a model from an MA, and you'll still have all your lights set up and locked on layers, and you'll be ready just to pretty much light any model you want because your lights will already be set up, your render camera is already set up. All you gotta do is just make sure you're rendering from the right camera. That's an older one. So remember, you go to render, render, render camera, the camera that you had set up. It'll even get the same angle and the same gray background going for you. Oh, that has my normal map on it. Didn't look very good inside of my software, so I took it off. All right, so you can even delete all the models from this scene, leave all your lights in your camera, go to File, Save As, and you can just call this render scene. And from now on, you kind of have just a render scene you can fall back on that already has your lights and cameras set up. So if you're, rendering multiple models, you can just import file, import. You can just import whatever model you want to, and it'll import it. And you'll see in your outliner, it'll have Granite 1, which is the name of the file, just a random generic name for your model. And there it is in my outliner. All right. Thanks, you guys, for listening. And the video went a little bit longer than I thought, but we covered a lot of good, useful things to make your life a little bit easier in Maya and to get some really nice renders really quick. All right. Thanks, guys, for watching.